Just surrender, whether it's or I give them all that you got. Your feet, yeah. Do your dance, moving and grooving while you have the chance. With your voice, sing the song, sing it to get to let right to roll. Just don't forget what we came in for, to encourage each other and bless the Lord.
But we also, you also care about these issues. I know when the Dallas shooting happened, for example, and even before the Dallas shooting of the 5 officers, remember what the protesters and the officers were out there for. That issue is as real as those officers being slain on the streets of Dallas. They were out there protesting the adverse treatment that people of color have been experiencing by the hands of some police officers in these communities. They were marching, protesting those issues. And I thought to myself, when you called me, you were just as broken and grieved in some of the loss of lives of those citizens whose lives were lost at a traffic stop, and whose lives were lost just in a routine interaction that most people take for granted. And I thought to myself, how is it that you have come to have a burden, a concern about these issues? I've always been curious, what sort of brought you to an awareness and an interest and even a passion about these issues?
But it turns out that I think this has been a passion of mine for years in my ministry, and I didn't realize it. My son is in the room, so I won't look that way. Till my son began asking questions. And when a 12-year-old can look you in the eye and say, "Why is it, Dad, that adults act and say and treat one another in a manner that you would never allow a kid to do?" And when your response back to them begins with, "Well, things get complicated or complex." And I realized in that moment I was about to give my son an excuse. Rather than helping him to understand and begin to critically think through these issues and to make informed decisions. What he understood as a 12-year-old was that relationship matters. So today we celebrate 9/11. And I don't know if you saw the news call, the Seattle Seahawks, Doug Baldwin came out and said, today we celebrate and we remember a very important day, a pivotal day in the history of our country. They said, regardless of how people feel about some of the things like with Colin Kaepernick and so forth, they said today is a day of unity. And so today we're going to stand arm to arm when the pledge is said, or when the national anthem is played. Now, that doesn't mean that next week and in other settings that's not going to take place, a peaceful protest. Well, in having conversations with Bob because of my relationship with him, and my son's relationship, my son loves Mr. Bob. All he knows is Mr. Bob is a kind man who bends over backwards to make time for a 12-year-old kid. And I've learned a different side as well about how the police department feels at times. And I feel for them. I empathize with him and others because they also feel like so much has been put on them that didn't used to be on them. Responsibilities that they never should have had. Like there are with teachers. We put responsibilities on teachers that wasn't what the job ever was. And when we do that, we set unrealistic expectations where they can never fail. And I can tell you that at times he and others have felt beat up because they feel viewed by the public at times in light of the perspective of folks who have dropped the ball.
And or the methods. Colin Kaepernick, as I said to Ed Johnson, as I told individuals last night, he had every right to do and to protest in a manner that's consistent with the values of our nation. Protesting peacefully. What I challenge are the readers of the journal, what I challenge our parishioners in our first service, what I challenge you is, let's not get caught up in this method of protest. If it's legal, lawful, respectful, let's set that aside. What is he protesting about? And is there legitimacy in those issues? See, that's the mature conversation. And so anybody can throw and inferences and slogans and disparaging comments towards him. But what is the issue? And the issue is one of factual basis. that this own city has had to confront and address. By the requirements of our Justice Department, it's been recognized by FBI director, by the President of the United States, by the Chief of Fraternal Order of Police. This is a real issue. And so I say, hey, set the method aside, but is there substance to the issue he raised? And so that's the push, that's the stretching that's required of all of us who are, as Dr. King says, a coalition of conscience. In other words, a committed group of people, regardless of race or background, who are just as disturbed as people who are falling victims to such treatment at what they're seeing. As African American men, I've had this conversation with Toby, and I know you have seen it as a person of color. This has long been an issue in our community. This is not new for us. And so, as I said in the article, as I say here today, as I look out and see the Honorable John Lewis here today, our former Chief of Staff to the Governor, our Treasurer here, thank you, John, for your leadership that you've given. As I look out and see him, but I was thinking, we're not, with every other profession I can think of, there's bad apples. The last decade, we saw a particular denomination deal with bad pastor or priest who took advantage of the vulnerable. An entire church was brought to shame because of bad pastors, bad faith leaders, bad clergy, bad priests. I've had bad dentists. Has anybody ever had a bad dentist?
That's bad.
You're like, bro, where did you get your license from to practice, man? Walmart? Dude, I had an accountant one time missed a couple zeros. I'm still paying back the government. By the way, one of her many roles, Pamela has worked for the Internal Revenue Service, by the way. I paid that money back. But somehow we thought, well, because you have a badge, because you have a gun, that you're empowered by virtue of the state and the city, that it's wrong for us to criticize or wrong for us to raise issues, that you're unpatriotic. There are bad women and men in police departments who are doing things that dishonor the good number and the majority of police officers who are serving on the front lines day in and day out. So let's be mature enough to have that honest conversation. Good officers should resent bad officers. My uncle was a police officer. Thank you. My uncle was a police officer. I have served ride-alongs with police officers. I have served with them in chaplaincy situations. They have protected me in places I've gone. So this is not a beat-up session on bad officers. This is a recognition. Listen, we have issues in our society. One of the responses, and I'll say this, I want to get your response. Someone tweeted back at me and says, well, based on my article, yeah, goody, now if we could just do something about the black-on-blacks killing each other in places like Chicago, which, by the way, 500 deaths this year, record number high. And I said, I didn't respond, but I thought to myself, no, it's not one or the other. That's a real issue too. But remember in the scriptures in Luke chapter 8, when the demonic man approaches Jesus, he says, what is your name? He says, my name is Legion. Legion was a term used to describe a Roman regiment, military regiment, 5,000 upwards to 12,000 soldiers. And he uses that term metaphorically speaking, saying, my name is Legion. In other words, I have many demons. America has many demons. Economic injustice based upon gender, demon needs to be confronted. Black on black crime in America, demon needs to be confronted. Police officers who use their badges and their power and abuse others, demon needs to be confronted. So all that to say, we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
That's right.
We're mature enough to do that. But
one of the things we put on there was education, group study, and inviting diversity. It's finding ways of being in relationship and being engaged in conversation. I gotta tell you, it's important to be engaged in conversation with people that you don't always agree with. That's a blessing. It's a way in which we grow and understand in a different way. One of the things that happened last night, we had a dinner meeting last night, and I had said it kind of earlier on, but Toby reshaped it. And as we got real intimate with one another, Toby turned and he said, What you're trying to create is to have that time, to have that moment. You know what I talk about when I mean a moment? You know that moment where you feel very transparent, you're willing to say whatever you need to, even if it might hurt or show you as vulnerable, but you trust that other person so much, you're willing to say those things in order to have better understanding of yourself and of the other. And it still may not mean that you come out to have the same opinion, but that's all right. But how do you get to that moment? Well, part of it is you have to build a relationship. And one of the ways we build a relationship is by educating ourselves, inviting diversity in our own lives, difference of opinion. How about prayer? Always, always involves prayer. And remember, prayer is not about us changing somebody else's mind or God's mind. We're not the advisory committee. It's about us paying attention to what God has in store for us. And I think that prayer leads us to self-reflection. Bishop Bledsoe and I, as we were talking through some of this, he began to share this idea. He said, Todd, we all have bias and prejudice. Now, we were joking about some, I mean, you know, I have bias against those Cowboy fans and all that stuff. We all have those. It's not a matter of having those. In fact, we talked about wanting to get people over that. It's not even a matter of getting people over it, because oftentimes we don't even know what they are in our own lives, right? And so part of it is about self-reflection.
To seek justice and love kindness.